Sawadee Krap, hello and welcome to another Victor Black Masterclass video. In today's Masterclass, we're going to be looking at the drug Metformin, and specifically today's video is a primer, a 101, a high-level introduction to Metformin and potentially why we as physique development athletes may be interested in its use. What does it have to offer us in physique development? Okay, so basically what we're going to be doing as we run through this program is I'm going to be touching on some potential applications for Metformin in our world. I want to start off with explaining what the drug's actually used for on label first, and then look at the potential applications in weight loss, in building muscle and accruing muscle, and then potentially as an anti-aging agent. And then there's going to be follow-on videos in each of those domains on this subject. So I'll be doing a breakaway video on use as a dieting aid, use as a muscle building agent, use as an anti-aging compound. Okay, so where does this fit? Where does Metformin fit into our hierarchical pyramids? I always like to refer back to these so we understand what's important, what's not, hierarchically. Basically, this fits right in here in the world of enhancement. It really fits more into the world of nutrition than it does into our anabolics pyramid. This compound is not truly a anabolic compound. It's an ancillary compound that can potentially assist us with performance enhancement in the world of nutrition, and you'll understand where that fits in when we finish this video. So just to understand, a lot of guys come looking for magic pills. The magic bullet's going to fix everything. There are no magic pills in this world. Yes, it is true that some anabolic and androgenic compounds are so powerful that they will produce outcomes with basically no effort. And there's very good evidence, as I presented before, that simply the administration of something like testosterone, when you raise your testosterone levels to super physiological doses, you don't even have to train to get an outcome. You can sit on your ass and you're going to build muscle with something like that. This, however, is one of those compounds that it works when you combine it with calorie control, calorie restriction. That's when the magic of this product happens. So in our hierarchical pyramid of what is important, energy balance is first, macronutrients, micronutrients. Once we get these things locked down, once we have a good handle on our macro and micronutrient requirements, the obvious thing to do is look further up the pyramid for wins. And this is one of those wins that comes after energy balance, after macronutrients, after micronutrients. We can start to look at what can we do in terms of enhancement to make this whole process more effective, more efficient, better. Okay. So today we're going to talk about what does Metformin do. We're going to introduce the concept. What does Metformin do with regard to weight loss, to our bodybuilding lifestyle, and we're going to touch on anti-aging. And as I said, there'll be a breakaway video in each of these three domains for masterclass members that wish to know more about each of these areas. Okay, let me start off by introducing the compound. Metformin is a first-line therapy. Basically means it's a prioritized therapy for type 2 diabetes, which was traditionally known as non-insulin dependent diabetes. And it's currently one of the most prescribed drugs in the world. This is a very, very, very commonly used drug. First developed in the 1920s and saw kind of like an up and down sort of rise and fall of popularity. And most recently in about 1995, 1996 region, somewhere around there, the popularity of this compound kind of took off, and it's been on the rise and rise ever since. It's my opinion that this is going to be the next big anti-aging drug, Metformin. So we saw 20 years ago when your general practitioner told you that testosterone would kill you, that HGH was the devil's poison. Both of these compounds are now mainstream anti-aging practice, widely accepted as quality of life improvers. We're going to see, in my opinion, the same adoption of Metformin from the general public. So not diabetics, not class 2 diabetics using this compound, but the general population will adopt this drug, and I'll get into that a little bit later on why, due to the many, many, many benefits this compound has to offer. Okay, let me start with a very quick introduction. This is very simplistic, but it's enough for most people to understand how metformin works. It works in 3 ways: by inhibiting the production of glucose in the liver, okay, by reducing intestinal glucose absorption from the foods that we eat, and by improving glucose uptake and utilization, basically in the realm of what we would call insulin resistance or insulin sensitivity, okay? And there are, as I mentioned, a very large number of additional potential health benefits that kick on from that, and we'll talk about some of those as we go through with the presentation. So this is a bit of a walkthrough, but I think it's kind of important because a lot of guys don't understand this. The concept of insulin resistance, because this is really at the heart of why this drug is so potentially powerful, not just for class 2 diabetics, but for people in preventing that condition. So insulin's a hormone that's secreted by the pancreas, by the beta cells of the pancreas, and it's secreted in response to the ingestion of food. So one of the things we're going to be talking about in the bodybuilding lifestyle thing is the concept of us constantly eating. We're eating all the time, right? That basically means that people that are having a high carbohydrate diet are constantly stressing, constantly pressuring the pancreas to produce insulin to deal with that ingestion of the food. So the insulin then transports the glucose in that food up to our cells throughout our body, basically throughout our body, where the glucose is then used for a myriad of tasks, principally the creation of energy, okay? And glucose and insulin penetrate, let me put that up there. So glucose and insulin then penetrate the cell membrane through receptors that in abnormal circumstances become blunted over a time frame. And really that's this concept of insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance, and that is the idea is that insulin, right, locks into the insulin receptors and effectively opens the gateway to allow glucose to channel into the cell, right? And what happens is that the receptors become blunted to the presence of insulin in over time, right? Now, what's the underlying root of insulin resistance? It's enough to say in the simplest possible way, because you could spend an hour talking about this and have a huge debate about the underlying mechanisms behind insulin resistance. It's enough to say 2 things. One is your genetics, and 2 is the environment that you create for yourself, including age, including your diet, including many other factors. Pharmacology has an influence as well. So insulin resistance is a phenomenon that's created through environment and through genetics, okay? And basically what it does, as I said, is it blunts the receptor's ability or the willingness to accept insulin, and therefore impacts upon the glucose channel at the cell membrane level. Okay, I really don't need to get into too much discussion. We'll talk about that later in other videos, right? So insulin sensitivity is one of these fascinating things in bodybuilding language that people don't really talk about at the degree that I think it deserves attention. And what I mean by that is people talk about genetics and they say, he's got good genetics or he has bad genetics. One of the things that I believe that's grossly underplayed in this business is people's individual ability to manage insulin and the corresponding outcome to outcomes in this business. So guys that have very, very, very good natural ability to manage insulin, right? It's just a genetic thing, right? Tend to do very, very, very well in this business, right? Insulin, as everyone probably knows, is a hormone that's used in the elite ranks of this business. It's a very powerful hormone in terms of soliciting outcomes in this space. And guys who are naturally genetically gifted, in my opinion, tend to have very good insulin resistant abilities. They manage insulin very, very well. And guys that don't do well do significantly worse. All right, so there's a very big genetic component to outcomes. Everyone understands that. One of these outcomes is, so how do you tolerate insulin? What is your insulin sensitivity as an individual? Okay, so this is a compound that potentially is used on label to assist people with insulin sensitivity issues. Okay, and basically we're going to leverage that same capacity to improve our performance. Okay, so we're going to use that to improve our performance in terms of weight loss, and we're going to talk about muscle building, and we're going to talk about anti-aging, as I said. Okay, so first pass, this is a primer. There'll be breakaway videos on this subject, but for the purpose of this video, the primer, it's enough to basically understand that in terms of weight loss, basically the way metformin helps us is it provides mechanisms that there's less glucose in the bloodstream that's available for storage as fat. All right. And at the same time, when you're using it as I am right now, so I'm in a dieting phase and I take metformin in the evenings before I go to bed. So that when I wake up AM, right, in a fasted state, right, my glucose level in my blood is very, very, very well set up to burn fat. All right, I primed myself for a fat burning condition first thing in the morning by controlling my glucose at night. Okay, so I wake up with very good blood glucose control, and therefore I'm primed in the morning for a fat burning state. I take my human growth hormone, which accelerates that process. I fast for kind of 2 hours. It accelerates that process. I do fasted cardio, which accelerates this process. So hopefully you guys can get the picture here. It's like tick, 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 tick. It's one step, adds to the next step, adds to the next step. Metformin is the tool that sets us up for the beginning of these phases or these step-by-step approaches to optimal fat burning outcomes. Okay, wake up fasted, good blood glucose control, introduce your HGH, do your fasted cardio, wait a little while before you introduce basically food into the system is the optimal way to burn fat. Okay. Something of note here, there's been a number of studies that we'll be talking about in the weight loss video that break away and talk about metformin as a weight loss drug. There really are not very many weight loss drugs that are available for consideration, principally because of side effects. And we'll talk about side effects of metformin in a minute. But because it is very low side effect drug, it's been considered and studied in obese people for weight loss. And what's really interesting, and I think it's important, is that metformin's been shown to diminish fat tissue, but it doesn't have an impact on lean body mass. All right, and that's an important thing for what we're doing. We don't want to take compounds that are catabolic in nature. We want to leverage compounds that help us to burn fat tissue and a sparing of muscle tissue. And in this regard, metformin fits that bill very nicely. Okay, again, I'll explore that further in the paid video. Okay, so one of the question marks that has always hung over the use of metformin in the bodybuilding community is this idea that metformin is bad for building muscle. Okay, I will admit, I'm the first person to admit, for a very, very, very long time, I struggled to understand this. I've kind of battered my head against this, trying to understand this. Principally, the reason behind that is this, IGF-1. So the reason, and we'll talk about this in a minute, the reason that metformin has been used as an anti-cancer drug is because it inhibits IGF-1. All right, so if you just follow the logical concept of, well, IGF-1 is an extremely anabolic agent and something that we want to promote. In fact, the reason that we take HGH in many regards is to uptick our IGF-1. All right, so we take our HGH and that produces an IGF-1 uptick. Why would it make any sense then to take a compound like metformin that is demonstrably impacting upon IGF-1 in pushing it down? Very good question, right? So a lot of the bro science community will just simply take the fact that IGF-1 is inhibited through metformin and say you shouldn't use it because, all right? I understand that's a reasonable place to start the discussion. However, we need to push further down into this discussion. There are studies underway. This is a current study, so we'll discuss this in the muscle building video. The results of this study are not yet out, so this is currently being conducted as we speak. Okay, and it's where they're using metformin specifically to augment strength training in older guys. So why would they do that? Why would they use metformin, right, which is known to inhibit IGF-1 release, right, in older guys to elicit basically muscle growth, right? Why does that make sense? And it all comes down to this: insulin resistance, right? Yes, it's potentially true, right, that IGF-1 is inhibited by metformin, all right? But you have to understand this. If I go back and try and find my picture, right? Right. If we can't get glucose into the cell, okay, because we are insulin resistant, right, that's killing us. That's killing our progress, right? Okay, so we can drill down a half a dozen further levels about, IGF-1 and that sort of stuff, but you're stepping over $100 bills to pick up $5 bills, if that makes sense, right? The reason, in my opinion, that these compounds are valid for bodybuilding is on a conditional basis. If you were an individual that had particularly good insulin characteristics, right, you just thrived, right, on insulin, you didn't experience any resistance, any sensitivity at all, then potentially, then metformin might be something that you would go, I'm going to pass on this compound for the purposes of building muscle, okay? So there are some customers, there are some clients, there are some cases where you can say, well, I don't think metformin is the right choice for me. Right? Inversely, there are individuals, okay, older men in particular, that basically do have an issue in some cases that the use of metformin has such a profound impact on offsetting those conditions that it more than makes up for any downturn potentially in IGF-1. This is my opinion, right? This is why metformin has been shown to be very useful in things like burn victims, right? Dealing with, the catabolic events of burn victims with older guys. So my point is do I think that metformin is a type of drug that everybody should use every day? No, I don't, all right? I believe there's a class of people that should use this drug and how they should use it and when they should use it to maximum effect. And we'll be exploring who those people are, how much they should be taking, when they should be taking it, when they shouldn't be taking it in the videos that follow on from this. But please understand, I think it's overly simplistic, like so many of the bro science concepts out there, to simply say, well, metformin's an anti-cancer drug. It's an anti-cancer drug because it impacts on IGF-1, and so we automatically dismiss it out of hand and saying we don't want to use it. I think that's very simplistic. We need to look at, so who are we? What are the things that are impinging our progress, right? What's holding us back, right? And is there a case to be made that metformin might be a good compound for us? That's how we should be approaching this. And any individual who's particularly insulin sensitive that has a marked degree of insulin resistance, I believe you'll get more than enough return on investment from metformin to offset any potential IGF-1 inhibition, okay? Again, there'll be a video that comes out that talks about that. I do want to touch briefly here on this concept of anti-aging. One of the things about this drug that I really like is that, unlike most of the things that we stick into our bodies, metformin appears to be just all-round good guy in terms of like anti-aging in the number of things that it does to assist us with health span and longevity. We'll talk about a couple of those things as we get through the thing. But this is a drug that has potentially more upside than downside, right? It's very much a drug that, in my opinion, you should look into, try to understand. Don't use it in a blanket way. Don't just like, right, I'm going to start taking that. Ask the question, when do I take it? When might I not take it? How much should I take? How should I use this in collaboration with what other synergistic compounds? Okay. A point on individual variability. This is one of those drugs where there is a very large degree of individual variability. Okay. So based on the study data that comes out, the variety of individual response to this product is quite profound. Some people respond to it magnificently, and some people basically have very poor response to it. So again, a little bit of N equals 1, individual trial and error. If you choose to use this drug, do your own due diligence, try it, but understand that there are some individuals that are hyper responders to this drug and some individuals that are non-responders to this drug. That's quite well understood in the evidence. Okay. Risk profiles. How risky is this drug? Remember, this drug, when I go back to my main presentation here, where were we? Okay, this drug has been around since the 1920s, in quite common use since the 1970s, and mainstream use in America since 1996. Okay, this is one of the most prescribed drugs in the world. Okay, so this is not Trembolone. This is not some obscure peptide that hasn't been tested for human use. This isn't a veterinary drug. This is a drug prescribed to millions of people around the world, and it has a body of data to support that user base. Okay, so in terms of safety, metformin has a safety profile dating back over 60 years. Very good data on this subject. In 2012, when 18,000 patients were followed up that had basically, time on this drug, long time exposure to this drug, there basically were no major adverse events to follow up in terms of lactic acidosis or hypoglycemia. Okay, so one of the questions that I often get asked about this drug, unlike insulin, just be aware that metformin doesn't create a condition of hypoglycemia. Okay, so you don't need to concern yourself. One of the greatest issues of using other diabetic drugs is they can create a hypoglycemic condition, which can be very dangerous. If it's not managed intelligently, it can actually kill you, right? So this is a drug that doesn't basically create a hypoglycemic state, period. All right? Okay. There have been some mild conditions reported over the years with this product. You can see here, mild anemia occurred in 12% of metformin-treated patients, but you have to consider that it also occurred in 18% of the placebo group. Okay, so it's not like 12% of people that took it experienced mild anemia. There was a differential between the two groups of something that you need to be aware of. Same thing with vitamin B, B12. A lot of guys may have heard the concept that vitamin B12 is something that metformin has a negative impact on. So what are the numbers? So 7% of these 18,000 users studied had a vitamin B deficiency noted, but 5% of the placebo group after 13 years, right, had a deficiency as well. So what's the variability between the placebo group and the metformin group is the question we need to be asking. Don't worry about this. Worry about the differential. A small number. Agreed. The risk of B12 deficiency increases with duration of use. All right, but it wasn't it wasn't any greater in old guys or younger guys. Okay, so that's good news for us old guys. And basically, the risk of lactic acidosis appears to be related to renal function, kidney function, not age. Okay, so the risk is currently considered to be very low. Okay, so considerations rather when using metformin. So the big one is dosing. People always ask me, how much do I need to use, Victor? Right? So it's important to understand here that all of that data that I talked about, all this safety data, right, very, very, very good safety track record, was premised on prescribed dosages, okay, which the product can be prescribed up to 2,250 milligrams a day, okay. However, it's been noted that when it comes to, let me just jump forward a little bit, when it comes to dose-response relationship, there's a cutoff point at about 1,500 milligrams a day where there's no potential increased response from it, right? So more than 1,500, 1,700 milligrams a day, I think is the actual number. That's 1,700 milligrams a day. There's no increased response in terms of glucose control, right? So where do we basically fit? I recommend guys use 500 milligrams a day, but the common dose is between 500 and 1,000. We'll talk about the difference, when would you use what in the other videos. What's important to note here, though, is that there's a curve of side effects, all right, that come with use, all right? And the more that you use, the more of any compound really you use, the greater the degree of the side effects. Now, this particular side effects talks about one of the most common side effects of this compound, which is an upset stomach, right? So the more of this you use, you can see there's a pretty steep curve that, once you get over 1,500 milligrams a day, the rate of rise in distress on tummy upsets rises exponentially. It kind of takes off, right? So as with most drugs, this is true of all dose relationships, there's a point whereby the maximal half dose, the maximal dose, the therapeutic effect and the side effects take off, right? There's a point about halfway, okay? So what that says is that about 50% of the therapeutic effect of a drug, right, carries with it doses, side effects, right, which are very manageable. And then once you cross that threshold of 50% of the therapeutic dose, the side effects really kick in and take off, okay? So what does that mean to us in terms of considerations for dosing? I recommend, therefore, that we stick at the lower end of the range with this, right? About 500 milligrams a day, okay? I know a great many people that go to 1,000, that's fine. I'm not suggesting that's unsafe, but what I'm suggesting is the return on investment, right, between 500 and 1,000, right, is significant, but potentially we minimize our side effects by doing that. So are we getting a good return for our buck? That's a question you need to ask yourself. And how you do that, in my opinion, is you start at about 250 milligrams a day and you increase that to 500. And then you potentially increase that again and again and again to a ceiling potentially of, say, 1,000 milligrams a day. And you need to then observe the outcome of that effect. So what did this bring me? 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 How did I feel? How did I respond? And go through the process of incrementally increasing the dose and monitoring the effect that that dose has on you in terms of performance outcomes, but potential side effects as well. Okay. For me, personally, I've settled on about 500 milligrams a day as a dose that makes me feel like I'm getting a good return for my investment, but at the same time, I'm not getting any side effects. I don't feel any distress in terms of upset stomach and all those sorts of things. Okay, just want to touch on this very briefly once more. And this is this anti-aging study. If you're not aware of it, there's a major anti-aging study underway at the present time on metformin. It's still being conducted, so the research results are not available for us to see at this point in time. But fundamentally, what it's premised on is that they noticed that with type 2 diabetes patients, right, that metformin had a capacity for tumor suppression, all right? So it had a protective element to its use from cancer, right? And the population studies have shown that there's a significant reduction in multiple different types of cancers, including prostate cancer, which is good news for us guys, and that metformin might also inhibit growth of cancer cells, all right? So there's a lot of work that's going on in this area at the moment. A lot of it's still trialing, a lot of it's still evaluating, how it all fits in. As I said, this is a major study, a multi-year anti-aging study, premised on pretty much the following things. One is observational suggestion. Okay, so basically observation of study subjects over years suggests that metformin decreases cancer incidence. Okay, so there's a number of studies here that if anyone's interested, you can drill down further into that. I find it absolutely fascinating. This, as I said, this whole area is where this premise of IGF-1 suppression and people's concern over the use of it as a bodybuilding drug comes from, because that's what I believe to be the underlying cause of the suppression of tumors is that it has an IGF-1 suppression capacity. The second thing is that there's a emerging body of evidence that talks about metformin being good for our cognitive function, which is good for us old guys, which, hopefully everybody is aware of the issues with aging and cognitive function. And it would appear that metformin has many benefits in that regard as well. There are also benefits in terms of lipid profiles. So, this is a drug that has, just like I said, many, 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 many potential benefits, all of which are being evaluated as we speak. They all look promising. Now, you can be the kind of guy that sits back and waits for the study data to become available, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. I find that completely acceptable. It's the very safe path. You will find, in my opinion, that in 10 years' time, this will be part of mainstream anti-aging practice, okay? Why do I think that? Why am I so bullish on it? 60 years of use, this drug doesn't have a bad safety track record. The worst possible thing, in my non-medical opinion, that's going to come out of this is that they basically say, look, we studied this and we realized that it worked in these areas, right, and it didn't work here and here, okay? So we still get our insulin sensitivity issue resolved. We potentially might not see an improvement in cognitive function. Who cares, right? I want to know about the risk. What's the risk of me taking it? And at this point in time, based on 60 years of use and millions of people using this product, this is a very low-risk drug, in my opinion. Again, do your own due diligence. I'm not a medical practitioner. I'm not providing you with a consultation in that regard. Okay. So, contraindictions. Who should not take this product? Okay, so metformin in general is not recommended for people who have a history of kidney or liver disease, right? Or congestive heart failure, okay? There is a protocol available if you want to talk to me about it, or you can go looking for it for yourself, that basically talks about what people with renal issues should do, and fundamentally what it comes down to is dosing. There's a kind of a methodology that says, look, if you have this issue, you need to control the dose. So you don't want to be like maximum dose on this stuff. But given the fact that we as a community, are kind of starting at 25% of the dose that's prescribed, we're kind of in that domain anyway. So when people say, well, is this kidney toxic? Is this liver toxic? It's one of those drugs that is designed for lifetime use. So no, but it's also not recommended for people that have a history of problems. What should they do about it? Reduce the dose? Well, that's us anyway. We're not using full kick here. Okay. Also, people that have a history of alcohol abuse need to do some extra due diligence in this area because of the concern of lactic acidosis. Okay. So that, my friends, is today's video. It's, again, not designed to be a comprehensive how to do everything with metformin. It's a high-level primer for guys that are not familiar with the compound. Why would I potentially use this drug? What's it used for in the real world? What benefit does it have to me? There's going to be follow-on videos about why would you use it for weight loss, fundamentally to set you up in the ideal condition of a fat-burning state when you wake up in the morning. That's why we use it. It's a setup drug, okay? 2, why potentially would you use it as a muscle building drug? There are certain people under certain conditions where, if we can remove those conditions, we're going to improve our outcomes. There's certain people that you would go, well, I don't suffer from that condition, so potentially I might not, not only might I not get a benefit from it, I might need to consider about the potential downsides with IGF-1 inhibition with this drug. There's the anti-aging argument. So again, I'm going to make a video about anti-aging. A lot of guys don't even understand really what anti-aging means, right? So I'm going to have a breakaway video that looks at metformin and its use in anti-aging practices. So I hope you found that useful as a high-level 101 primer for metformin. And I look forward to seeing you at the next Vic Black Masterclass. Sawadee Cup.